In derogatory language would he, my father, look at those who linger in the streets and rebuke them menacingly. They note his insanity. Sinathangam dear, his gait ever so stately, he rambles from place to place. All those who sight him feel inclined to mock and jeer at him, my dear. These were the days of British Christian domination, when a Hindu sage or Swami had to disguise himself to continue his inner work, when sannyasins wore white, not orange, lest they be persecuted or thrown in jail. Indeed, Chelapa Swami was not mad, but was likely instructed by his guru to behave this way to avoid harassment. Chelapa Swami was a Janani who cloaked his greatness in Unmatha Avashta, the guise of a madman. Indeed, to the locals he was known as Visar Mad Chelapa Swami. To protect him at one point his family had him put in chains, giving even more credence that his behavior was for real. Chelapa Swami would stagger in a rapture through the streets of Jaffna, talking aloud to himself in cryptic phrases, complex and confounding, addressing everyone and no one at the same time, perhaps to discourage unworthy devotees and perhaps to throw off suspicion from the British-controlled government that he might be a spiritual leader and therefore a threat to them and their evangelical efforts. It was a time in Jaffna when well over half of the traditional Shaivite families had come under the influence, temporarily as it turned out, of the conversion-hungry Catholic, Anglican, and other Protestant faiths. Years later, Yogaswami was under similar pressures and was considered a madman by local people, but discerning villagers knew that these were the ones who were truly sane. These were the knowers of the unknown spoken of in the Vedas. These men were sadhus in their last lives, and thus were naturally inclined to sit absorbed for hours or even days in meditation, fathoming the depths of consciousness. That the community as a whole did not comprehend this was of little concern to them. Chelapa Swami of Nallar offers this insight. Though Chelapa Swami had openly declared, Chelapa will not reveal himself, devotees in large numbers came to him, affirming, Chelapa is our father, a good father who showers mercy on us, the golden father of Nallar. Even people from far-off places came to him with deep faith, to mention a few, Tirignang Sambanthar, Ramalingam, Thurayapa, and Panaya of Kolambuthurai. Arumugam Elaithambi, Thamotharam Palai, Thamotharam Pillai of Kantharamadam, and Murugesu of Kambantharai. Swami was very kind to them. When some of his pupils said they wanted to follow the ascetic path, he remarked, "That life and you are poles apart. You had better get married." When some said that their relatives were compelling them to get married and sought his permission, the Swami would say, "Why should you ask me to get married? Go at once." If anyone spoke about marriage, he would chide in a humiliating voice, bluntly saying, "Did you hear? The government agent wants me to marry his daughter. He wants me to marry, shall I?" Chelapa Swami told Yogaswami that to make it known you are a guru, a realized one, is even madder than appearing insane. Ordinary people would give you no peace. They would chase you night and day to extract blessings, almost by force, without doing anything to deserve that grace. They would come for material blessings, to have their future revealed, or just to stand near in hopes of something miraculous. Mrs. Intimathe Amma Navarantaraja shares this image of Chelapa Swami and thoughtful insights into his guise of lunacy in her manuscript Yogaswami Life and Teachings. The great personage Chelapar sat on the chariot house step every day, yet no divinity was visible on the dark-complexioned sadhu who sat with a vacant look on his face. Coarseness was the only visible sign. Even during festival times, when the crowd was so dense that a ray of light would not pass through, he would sit on the step, his face shining, laughing to himself. Sometimes he would lie on the step, looking at decriers. Sometimes he would berate with belittling words those who were wandering about aimlessly. They would in turn abuse him, call him a lunatic, and go away. He would not bother about this abuse and would continue to harangue them, taunting them to oppose him. Sometimes he would stand in Lord Skanda's presence before the sanctum wearing rags and scold in foul language those coming and going. At times he would wander to Tirunelveli, Kolambuthurai, and other places. People seeing him wander around would ridicule him as insane. He would stand begging before houses, accepting whatever was given. On some days he cooked rice and a curry. He did not sleep much. After midnight, using his hands as a pillow, he would be seen sleeping on the ground. His versatility with the hands in weaving palmyra and coconut leaves into various objects of art was the only factor that showed that he was not mad. But is this one factor alone enough for the crazy world to realize his sanity? Swami lived exhibiting the qualities of a madman and a great sage immersed in spiritual meditation. Those who were deluded by him considered him a madman. Those thirsting for spiritual knowledge saw him in his true colors, a man of deep knowledge. Shiva Yoga Swami saw him as the royal sage who in the form of a guru redeemed and saved him. At the Charadi I saw him, the crescent jewel of grace. He made me his own and showed me the way of bliss. With these baffling disguises Chalapa wandered alone, hiding his real name so that no one realized his true self. Even scholars who were well versed in Vedanta and Siddhanta, even those who had a long-standing friendship with him, could not realize his true inner nature. Chalapa acted well the role of a lunatic he had taken on himself. Yogaswami once noted, "For 40 years he acted the role he took without anyone suspecting and went away. Swami spoke cryptically in a language that had to be deciphered. Yogaswami himself recorded some of his gems. Intrinsic evil there is not, and absolute is truth, which none can ever comprehend." So saying, he would remain mute. It is what it is, and there is none who can know fully, as it is concealed in dissimulation. So uttered the lofty Chalapan, clad in ragged clothes, and haunting Kandan's frontal courtyard. At those who frequent that resort he will hurl abuse, my fond one. That is so from endless beginning, he would say and wander hither and thither. It's all elusive phenomena, he muttered. Who knows? And it was all settled long ago, and went about the outer courtyards of Nalur Temple and sat in the dirt, saying that all that dirt would frighten away the people who came to fall at his feet. I didn't think anyone ever got from him an answer to a question. I merely stood and waited behind him for the occasional gem that fell out of all the mad talk. Among the Sri Lankan Hindus there are countless marvelous stories about the powers of a realized person, stories that would bring curiosity seekers if a guru proclaimed himself. Swami said that devotees who are ready, those few souls who understand the true nature of a Satguru, will go through any barrier to be with him. Such a seeker will recognize and pursue the Satguru in any disguise he wears. Were the Satguru a homeless mendicant, a village pariah, the seeker would grow strong withstanding the disapproval the community might express in seeing him follow someone considered socially unworthy. The devotee seeking realization will not let anything stop him. Even if the guru chases him away, he will not be dissuaded from his path. He accepts as a blessing anything the guru does. He will change his form, his opinions, his intellect, his very nature, to bring himself into harmony with the guru. There are endless stories of people being sent away by a guru only to come back in disguise. If that didn't work, they would go away and undertake life, transforming tapas until they changed their nature and were able to return in good stead. Swami's nephew, his sister's son, lived in her house. The young man was hot-tempered, and even though he acknowledged Swami was a sage, often lost his temper with the Swami because Swami used such harsh and filthy language toward him, his mother and other members of the family sometimes offending their friends and visitors. One day Swami was standing by the open water well in the family compound, scolding his sister in a loud, angry voice. Running out of the house to defend his mother, the youth began screaming at Swami to stop. Swami yelled back at him, mocking his words. Suddenly, the boy jumped across the 2-meter wide well to get at the Swami, both fists flying. As he landed on the other side, Swami touched him lightly on the chest, and immediately all his anger was stilled. It vanished entirely. The boy just stood there dumbfounded, blinking in shock, not knowing where he was. The family learned through the years to respect Swami's advice. Once they and a few close friends planned a pilgrimage to Kataragama, the most famous of Sri Lanka's Skanda temples, located in the tiger-infested jungles deep in the southern hills. They saved their money and talked about the journey for months ahead of time. Swami knew they were going. When the day finally came to depart, though, he said, "Why go searching? God is here." They unpacked immediately. All but one of the party, who set out by himself. As it turned out, he never reached Kataragama. He fell desperately ill with malaria along the way and returned to Jaffna only after 6 months in the hospital and thousands of rupees in doctor's fees. Works of wonder. Most of the time, Swami could be found in the shade of his thorny bilva tree, the famed eagle marmelos, sacred to Lord Shiva, since its leaves form a trishula. Protected from the tropical sun under its massive canopy, he talked to himself, meditated, ate his meals, sat and made fans and containers of various shapes, from palmyra and coconut palm leaves. He often worked all day in the hot sun, weaving the leaves into fans. Mastering the art requires patience and skill, and none was better at it than he. Each fan was of unique design. No two alike. He gave the fans away to devotees and bystanders. It was a form of communion and blessing, imbued as they were with implied meaning of protecting, cooling, and relief from suffering. He also wove kajan from coconut fronds, a thatch used for roofs, walls, and fences. The mysterious Siddha wielded great influence. One of the honored sons of Sri Lankan culture was Sir Pranambalam Ramanathan, who founded the Ramanathan College for young ladies at Maruthanammadam at the edge of Jaffna town during Swami's time. On the day of its grand opening, Swami was among the 5 to arrive. He walked in through the open doors and presented Ramanathan with one of his best fans and said, "There is no intrinsic evil, finished long ago. Everything is true. We know nothing." The community attributes the school's success to Swami's blessing that day. The whole staff considered it extraordinary that this holy man had come to their school at this particularly auspicious moment on this most important day. Ramanathan did much for Shaivism, including building the Shivan Koil at Kochilkari, Colombo, with his own funds, decreeing that it be carved entirely from granite. The original temple had been built by his father, Mudaliar Ponnambalam, in 1856. The reconstruction was completed in 1910. Swami expected to be left alone. Even his own devotees approached only on invitation, visiting less on their initiative than his. If they needed anything from him, they would already have received it. He knew their minds. Devotees often sought his help at crucial times in their life. Here is an example from Swami of Nallur. A child of Ramalingam of Kalambuthurai was seriously ill. The parents were eager to take the child to Swami, but his mother-in-law warned them, "We do not know to what caste that madman belongs. Do not take the child to him." Brushing off this old woman's words, Ramalingam and his wife took the child to Swami. When he saw them, Swami ordered, "Kanakama, bring the child here. Give instructions to take the child to a native physician for a particular medicine," he declared. "Your mother is speaking of caste. I swear by the sun and the moon that we are no other than Valala caste from Vadukotai." When Swami touched the child, the temperature went down, and upon receiving the prescribed medicine, the child was fully cured. If strangers drew near, stopping out of curiosity to see what he was doing, he would scold, throw things, and chase them away. He would throw anything, dirt, mud, rocks, cow dung, garbage, just so they would let him be. In every scolding, Swami corrected devotees' misdeeds and touched the sorest and most sour area of their inner mind. They trusted him to know just where they were imperfect, just where they needed to change for spiritual progress. They hated these upbraidings, not only because they revealed those things most wanting to be hidden, but also because they were delivered with a spiritual force so penetrating that it felt like a deep psychic surgery. Yet again and again they went back for more, receiving those incisive corrections as divine blessings. They invariably improved in the days and months after his fiery grace descended on them in all its terrible fury. Just being in its presence, receiving a modicum of that infinite Shaktipata, transformed them, made them different, somehow better. Thus he spoke like a spiritual king to those with an inner ear. Those few, the lawyers, the judges, all who were of a subtle mind, loved and feared Swami. He would curse them, beat them verbally and even physically. He was their inner guide, the guru that inspired them to fully live a spiritual life, and spiritual life was universally understood in southern Sri Lanka to be the most exalted of human inquiries. Swami continued the Parampara's mighty mission of slowly but surely, step by step, awakening Shaivism within the hearts and souls of Tamils everywhere on this lush garden island. Were it not for him, there is no way of knowing whether Shaivism would have survived into the 21st century. Then again, on rare occasions, he paid no attention at all when people he had never seen before brought him flowers or prostrated in his presence. He sat impassively while they made their pranams. It was hard for them to discern if he knew they were there at all. No one ever knew what to expect from this perplexing spiritual giant, yet all got exactly what they needed. This was Swami's way, always the sage, never the saint. Many times he treated Yogaswami as if he had never seen him before, chasing him away and calling instead to some common passers-by off the street, people who weren't much interested in spiritual things. He would coax them sweetly to come near, then lecture, then berate in the vilest language imaginable, telling them what scum they were, living like animals, with no thought of God or their own souls, filling their bellies like pigs by day and sleeping like dogs at night, wallowing in endless desires, rushing down the royal road to hell, and so forth. He might go through every individual in the group, naming their secret vices, ticking off their private sins, abusing them right there in public. If they tried to leave, he followed them until he was through. He was unrelenting in giving forth his blessing, revealing the truth no matter how great the humiliation. His greatest city was to change the life force within people, hence change their lives. These psychic powers which he received from Kadait Swami, Swami passed on to Yoga Swami. The righteous anger of our sages is to this day called white anger by the Tamil people, the opposite of the hurtful black anger of the Vitala chakra below the Muladhara chakra. Whenever in time the issue of the Guru's fierce scoldings arose, Yogaswami challenged, "Is not a big fire necessary to burn rubbish?" In his later years, Yogaswami was himself a gifted scolder, and many people were afraid to come near him. But he said that anyone who thought he was harsh should have stood for a single second before his guru's scolding. Yogaswami explained that most people try to get you to love them by giving you something you like, so you will pay more attention to them. You transfer some of your attachment from the thing you like to the person who gave it to you. He told disciples, Telapaguru, through subtle guile, pulled me to his side by taking everything away. He did not allow me to put on any show, nor to do any service, nor to know the future, nor to have any siddhis, nor to associate with other saints or sadhus. He did not even allow me to wonder. Chapter 8, Yogaswami's Early Life. Mavidapuram is a quiet village 5 kilometers north of Jaffna, best known for its ancient Kandaswami temple, built in the 700s by Thisai Ukira Cholan, king of the South Indian Chola Empire. At the request of his daughter, prior to the time, the village and the region between it, Kirimalai and Kankasanturai, was known as Kovet Kadavai, God's house. It is mentioned by that name in both the Mahabharata and the Skanda Purana as a reputed tirtha, or holy spot. The sanctity of Kovet Kadavai is largely due to the hundreds of yogis and sages who did tapas there. According to the temple's legend, the Chola king's daughter, Maruthapiravali, suffered from childhood an incurable disease which finally left her ears swollen, her jaw distended, her appearance so disfigured it was said she looked more like a horse than a human being. No remedy succeeded in restoring her health, and when she came of age, she betook to endless pilgrimage, visiting temples throughout the Chola Empire, seeking the grace of the gods to remove her affliction. She was of saintly character, and her pitiable plight was all the more moving for it. Her misfortune came to the chance attention of the wandering sage, Shantilingam Munivar, who advised her to go to the famed seaside temple of Kirimalai on the north coast of Lanka to bathe there daily in the medicinal waters of the temple tank. Maruthapira reached the place with her maids and attendants in the year 785, and devoutly fulfilled a strict regimen of penance and prayers, fasting by day and bathing long in the temple springs as advised by the sage. Her condition improved from the first, until in time the affliction had gone and her natural beauty flowered as never before. Overjoyed with this new lease on life, Maruthapira lingered on in Kadavai, searching on every side for some means of repaying her debt and showing her gratitude to God. During her frequent walks to and from Kirimalai Shivan Koyil, she happened to witness the daily pujas of an old man, Sadayanar by name, who kept a small copper bell in the nook of a banyan tree and worshipped it there with fervent love and affection. Gazing at this simple shrine one morning, Maruthapira felt a divine urge to build a proper Skanda temple on that spot. She sent an appeal to her father, explaining all and soliciting his help. The dutiful father, moved by his daughter's transformation in far-off Lanka, responded at once, organizing a venerable army of temple architects, stone carvers, and laborers who arrived within weeks and set to work. It was a huge undertaking, yet fortune smiled at every turn. Ukira Singan, the Kalinga king of Jaffna, after inspecting the project himself, immediately placed his wealth and resources behind it. It was he who later gained the hand of Maruthapira in marriage. The deity for the temple, a handsome image of Lord Murugan known as Kankiyan, arrived from India along with a large staff of priests and others to manage the temple. They performed the consecration puja in great style and splendor, and thereafter the temple's fame spread throughout the islands, India, and even to Malaysia. The village Kadavai was known from that time as Mavidapuram, the horse-faced village. In 1619, during their third invasion of the Jaffna Peninsula, Portuguese soldiers and priests destroyed the 900-year-old temple, leveling it to the last stone. Most of the larger blocks were hauled kilometers away for building a sea fort at Kites, an island in the Palk Strait. Every major temple on the peninsula was similarly demolished during the colonizers' stay. They left nothing standing. For 41 years they ruled the north with callous missionary zeal. It was their custom to build Catholic churches from and upon the ruins of Shaivite temples they pulled down. The Dutch began their rule of Ceylon when Dutch Marines evicted the Portuguese in 1658. Overnight, Catholic churches became Protestant churches under Dutch ministers and continued for 140 years until the British displaced the Hollanders in 1798. The Dutch allowed some religious freedom. Indeed, a period of Shaiva revival took place. Still, the rebuilding of the Mavidapuram temple did not begin in earnest until 1782, after a lapse of a century and a half. The deities were all recovered, having been hidden in a well for most of the period. Encyclopedia Britannica gives us a glimpse into this era and the forces faced by Ceylon's Shaivites, colonial forces that subjugated the island until the end of British rule in 1948. The Netherlands was ardently Protestant, specifically Calvinist. In the early years of Dutch rule, an enthusiastic effort was made to curtail the missionary activities of the Roman Catholic clergy and to spread the Reformed Church in Sri Lanka. Roman Catholicism was declared illegal, and its priests were banned from the country. Catholic churches were given to the Reformed faith, with Calvinist pastors appointed to lead the congregations. Despite persecution, many Catholics remained loyal to their faith. Some nominally embraced Protestantism, while others settled with the independent Kandyan kingdom. In their evangelical activities, the Protestant clergy were better organized than their Catholic counterparts. In particular, they used schools to propagate their faith. During the period of Dutch rule in the coastal areas, there was a revival of Buddhism in the Kandyan kingdom and the southern part of the island. While the Dutch felt great antipathy toward Catholicism, they indirectly contributed to the revival of Buddhism by facilitating transport for Buddhist monks when Sri Lanka, Thailand, and the Arakan Rakhine region in southwestern Myanmar, Burma. Such services helped the Dutch maintain good relations with the King of Kandy. Representing a new strand in the traditions of both Sinhalese and Tamil literature, Christian writings began to appear during the Dutch period. Although most of these new works were translations of basic canonical texts, some were polemics that targeted both Buddhism and Hinduism. The 18th century writer Yakum Gosalves was among the most notable figures in Sri Lankan Christian literature. The Dutch East India Company's establishment in 1734 of the first printing press in Sri Lanka, used to meet the needs of missionaries as well as administrators, aided the proliferation of Christian texts. Today, Madhivapuram Koil is a thriving and popular temple staffed by Adishaiva priests who manage its shrines and festivals with consummate care. The temple murtis include Shanmunganathan, Murugan, Shivalingam, the original copper bell, and Vigneshvara Ganesha. All of them receive daily pujas, and the temple continues to grow. It boasts a soaring Rajagopuram, 3 spacious outer courtyards, and 5 chariots. Sadashaivism enters the world. The temple was less imposing than now on the night of Vaikashi, May-June, Danishta Nakshatra, May 29, 1872, when a son was born to Ambalavanar and Chinachi Amma in a simple house not far from its walls. The boy grew up in and around the most orthodox Shaivite culture. His father, Ambalavanar of Kalambuthurai, worked as a merchant on the eastern coast near Nuwara Eliya and was away most of the time. Chinachi, a devout Shaivite, raised the boy at their home in Kalambuthurai on the southwest coast of the Jaffna Peninsula until passing away when he was about 10. Stories of the gods, the lives of the saints, temple customs, and Tamil scriptures he first learned from her. It is proverbial in Shaivism that the mother is the child's first guru, yet even had she known the spiritual destiny that awaited her son, Chinachi could have done nothing better to prepare him by passing on the ancient ways of Shaivite culture, as she did. She named him Sadashivan. It is traditional in Shaivism that you do not ask a sannyasin about his past, so few questioned Yoga Swami about his childhood or family, and none but a rare few received an answer other than, "I am always as I am now. The way I am now I have always been." He did once say he was born on a Wednesday, but that was as specific as it ever got. Over the years, though, he sometimes related certain stories to illustrate a point in talking to his devotees, and by comparing notes later, they eventually pieced together a rough sketch of his youth. Inthumathi Amma shares the following. From his childhood days, when he took his mother's hands and went to Nallur, the god of Nallur filled his heart. Circumambulating the temple and prostrating before the deity became an experience that touched his heart. He enjoyed watching the hermits standing round the champaka tree, on seeing the devotees bringing different kinds of raw rice, bunches of bananas, coconuts, and other articles of worship. He experienced complete withdrawal of his senses. He stood with tears streaming down his face. Then the Brahmin priest offered lamps, camphor trays, and other lamps to the luminous god Murugan. His mother departed from this world when he was very young. From what Swami told us and a few other devotees, it is possible to infer that she must have lived at least till his 10th year. Swami shared little about his childhood, but he did recount that one day after a meal, he threw away the banana leaf which still had uneaten rice on it. His mother, trying to teach him to not be wasteful, chided, "You will live by begging." True to her words, he lived life as a beggar. He took delight in relating this incident to explain Saint Anivayer's words, "Do not disobey the mother." Thai Solaj Thatate. Yogaswami once narrated the last time his mother took him to a festival at Mavidapuram Koil shortly before she passed away. He said there was a huge crowd circling the temple, and he was holding tightly to her hand as they followed. He had on a veshti and a new silk shawl, which was wrapped around his waist at first, but somewhere it fell off and was lost. When a Tamil boy first wears a veshti, when he first has a silk shawl, and when he walks still holding his mother's hand, are all indicators of his age. From these clues, it is presumed Sadashivan's mother passed away when he was around 10. School days. For the next 6 years or so following his mother's death, Sadashivan was raised by his aunt Muthupillai and Uncle Chinaya, Ambalavanar's sister and brother. Aunt Muthupillai, a devout Shaivite, was responsible for Sadashivan's food, clothing, and shelter, as well as his continued training in Shaiva culture. He lived at her home in Kalambuthurai near the Jaffna Lagoon, 6 kilometers from Jaffna town. It was near the village Kurniadi, a large rectangular well where there was a small temple for Bhairava at which the family worshipped. Farmers working in the paddy fields in that area worship Bhairava, whose mount is a dog, for safety and protection. Chinaya, whose home was just 200 meters away, oversaw Sadashivan's studies because Ambalavanar worked so far away and lack of transport facilities at that time prevented frequent journeys to Jaffna. Muthapillai spared himself no time or trouble in raising her new son. Chinaya was a Roman Catholic convert and his wife was born a Catholic, facts which had little influence on young Sadashivan. Muthapillai's father-in-law, Nalar Ganapathy, a reputed Shaivite astrologer in Kalambuthurai, helped raise him as well. Sadashivan began his formal education in a Tamil school, but at age 10, Uncle Chinaya enrolled him at St. Patrick's College in Jaffna. Attending a Catholic school was not unusual in those days, since an English education could only be had from the mission schools. Civil service jobs were only available to English speakers, so these schools were always well patronized by the Hindus, despite the school's efforts to marginalize their faith. Like the Portuguese and Dutch before them, however, the British taxed the economy and resources of the island to the limit to help finance their worldwide empire. Secular education was more than they could budget in Ceylon, though they did offer token support to secular schools that taught English. Under foreign rule, times were uncertain for all Sri Lankans. A secure career and income required fluent English, whether for the civil service or private business. It was the custom for students registered to be given Christian names, such as Ford Duraswamy or Mark Chelia. Yoganathan was given the name John Pillai by the Franciscan monks who ran the school, but the name never took. During Sadashivan's first year at St. Patrick's, the village headman, Maniyakaran Muthukumaru, a stern old fellow who did not appreciate the Christianization of his culture, stopped the young student on the street as he came from school and asked him his name. John, came the reply. No, the headman shook his head. Your name is Yoganathan. It was a prophetic choice, meaning Lord of Yoga. S. Ampikapakan wrote in his biography entitled Yoga Swami. Muthapillai was an ardent Shiva devotee. She did not like that her brother Chinayai was joined in Catholic religion and that her nephew Yoganathan was studying in a Catholic college and had been given the name John. She used to give him Shiva books and Upanishads to study. Muthapillai is credited for saving Swamigal from the influence of Catholicism and for seeding Shiva devotion in him. Yoganathan attended school through age 16. Language was a love of his, and he used his youthful years to attain a high degree of proficiency in both Tamil and English, while reading avidly in subjects he liked. As precocious boys all over the world do, he sometimes assumed the role of teacher and instructed his classmates. Though he did well in his classes, he remained unenthused about school. Yoganathan was a quiet young man. While he did have school friends and was active, even restless, he often showed a serious, pensive mood. People felt his introspective religious nature was due to losing his mother, and everyone presumed he would get over it in time. Throughout his school years, he was usually off somewhere alone with his thoughts or at the temple. He studied Tamil scriptures daily and learned a great many hymns of the Shaivite saints, which he sang wherever he was. He memorized an amazing number of holy texts. Tirakural, Tiramurai, Ovayar's poems, Tirumanavar's verses, the Namasivaya, Malai, and more. A devotee recorded the following incident. One day in school, one of the brothers was explaining the biblical teaching that if someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn him also the other. Suddenly, Yoganathan walked up to the dais and gave a swift slap to the teacher. When the enraged teacher turned on him, the student left the class. This was the end of his formal education and the start of his spiritual quest. Chapter 9, Yoganathan is transformed. After Yoganathan left school in 1888, his father, Ambalavanar, took him to Mascalia, where he worked as a tobacco merchant, 350 kilometers from Jaffna, in the southern highlands due east from Colombo. The father hoped his son would settle down and learn the merchant trade. Ultimately, he was disappointed, as the young man was too fond of sitting alone outdoors, bare-chested on a large rock, meditating and enjoying the tropical mountain beauty of the region. Around 1890, his father sent him back to Coimbatore, realizing he had little interest in following the family trade. Ambalavanar passed away in Mascalia in 1892. Within a few months of his return to Jaffna, Yoganathan took a job with the Public Works Department irrigation section in Kilinochchi, a farming community 72 kilometers south of Jaffna. Ratnamana Navaratnam explains in St. Yogaswami and the Testament of Truth, in pursuance of the colonial policy of opening up the dry zone areas for the cultivation of paddy and the persistent efforts of Sir Ponnambalam Ramanathan, who represented the Tamil community in the Legislative Council of colonial Ceylon, the Iranamadu tank project was mooted out in the Kilinochchi area in the last decade of the 19th century, working for Mr. Brown. One large reservoir was to be established by combining existing smaller bodies of water. The Iranamadu project was first proposed by government agent Mr. Duke to the governor of Ceylon, His Excellency Sir Henry Ward. When Ward visited Jaffna in 1856, Mr. Parker, an irrigation engineer, submitted the final proposal in 1866. Completed in 1920 and expanded in later decades, the massive reservoir is now 9.5 kilometers in length north to south and 2 kilometers east to west. The Tamils of the arid north have been perennially interested in building and rebuilding water ponds, and irrigation works have been underway in the region for centuries. Yoganathan came under the employment of the project supervisor, an English engineer named Mr. Brown, a rough-hewn man who openly expressed his dislike for Tamils, regarding them, as did all his peers, as a class of savage beings subservient to superior peoples, such as the British. He took up residence on the site. His wife and children sailed from Liverpool to join him. Brown, impressed by Yoganathan's refined manners and personal discipline, hired him as his storekeeper, a trusted position that allowed some leisure. His new duty was to issue tools to the workers from the company's store at the beginning of the day, then collect and care for them at the day's end. He executed his work with great care. In his off hours, he planned and cared for fruit trees. One mango tree he planted in those days, known as the Swamis tree, still flourishes and fruits today, and is eagerly visited by devotees. The land on which the tree is situated was acquired by the Shivathandan Society. Yoganathan felt fortunate. The work was not strenuous, and he had his own quarters and free time each day to spend as he pleased. It was a forested area, cooler than around Jaffna, with few houses and lots of peacocks. He soon fit in with the routine and was on good terms with everyone. As part of learning the ropes, Yoganathan was warned many times about his employer's vicious temper. Before long, he witnessed incidents of it himself. The slightest offense would provoke Brown to a fury, and he didn't hesitate to beat his workers if they displeased him. Yoganathan always managed to stay on the outside of this by being extra careful around the volcanic engineer. He watched Brown to discern his mind and learned to be sensitive to his moods. He soon discovered subtle ways of protecting himself. Whenever he felt Brown was upset and about to get angry, he picked up a tool of some kind and simply held it in his hands. That averted any potential attack. Yoganathan got along well with him through the years. He knew Brown liked him because he let him play with his children. Mr. Brown once described him as a conscientious member of his staff who hurried off to meditate as soon as he finished his work. Mr. Brown used to address him as God-man and often said, "You are a God-fearing man." Ultimately, they grew so close that Yoganathan started teaching the Tamil language to Mr. Brown. There were qualities that Yoganathan admired in Mr. Brown as well. He had a keen sense of duty and wouldn't neglect or put off even the smallest matters. He took personal responsibility for everything that went on at Iranamadu, and this kept the work moving ahead through every difficulty. Through the years, Yoganathan saw everything at the project, hundreds of men, supplies, livestock, accounts, engineering, turning like clockwork around one man who held duty sacred. It impressed him. About 50 bulls were attached to the project to do the hauling and heavy work. Mr. Brown insisted they receive the best of care and did not permit them to be abused. After the day's work, their drivers led them to the river to wash and feed them, and every day Mr. Brown walked down to see that they did it right. It was a lesson Yoganathan never forgot. Life at the irrigation company in Kilnotchchi had its dark side and difficulties. Aloof from the staff, Yoganathan was hassled by one among them, a bully who took every opportunity to taunt his brown-skinned junior. Months of this wore on, and one day, in the fury of an encounter, the bully threatened Yoganathan, not knowing that inside his younger victim a fire was smoldering. A fight ensued, during which Yoganathan stabbed the aggressor. It was a terrible event, and Mr. Brown took it seriously. Yoganathan was ordered to serve 6 weeks of hard labor at the nearby Mankalam quarry. Meanwhile, Uncle Chinaya tried repeatedly to arrange a match for the young man, but Yoganathan wanted no part of it. He felt his path lay elsewhere. He spent his money on scriptures, books of hymns, and stories of the Shaivite saints. He studied these over and over again, never content until he could establish within himself the truth of the words he read. It awed him to think that life in this world could be lived with such purity and devotion. He knew the stories of the saints by heart and was forever singing their Devarams. In order to study Sanskrit scriptures, he acquired proficiency in Sanskrit during these years as well. Kilnotchchi afforded him the peaceful surroundings he needed for the study and worship he so valued. Yoganathan made good use of his name. He spent his days off alone in contemplative settings and was a constant visitor at all the nearby temples. People were amazed at how well and how deeply he knew the many scriptures of Hinduism. He would recite them page by page. Mornings and evenings he meditated on what he read, and gradually he built up a daily routine of sadhanas. He added to these disciplines from time to time, and as his meditations deepened, he took up various kinds of tapas as well. Sometime during his years in Kilnotchchi, he took a formal vow of celibacy to affirm his commitment to the spiritual path and his decision, despite family efforts to the contrary, never to marry. Into Mathai Amma notes, years later he told his devotees that he cultivated the habit of spending everything he earned in that month itself without saving anything for a rainy day. Except for his meager personal expenses, he spent the rest of the money on temples, friends, relations, and the poor and needy. While Yoganathan was employed at Iranamadu, a crucial event occurred that nurtured his inclinations to renounce the world. Ratnama Navaratnam wrote, "At about this time, the triumphant return of Swami Vivekananda from the World's Parliament of Religions at Chicago created a stir in the hearts of the people enticed by alien culture, and his visit to Ceylon was acclaimed as a happy augury for the renewal of the faith in Hinduism. The prophet of the New Age came to Yalpanam in 1897, and his elevating lectures at Hindu College, the Esplanade, and the Shaiva Pathashala at Coimbatore made an undying impression on Swami. It is reported that when Swami Vivekananda was ceremoniously brought in a carriage drawn by the leading Hindu citizens to address the public at the present Hindu Mahavidyalaya at Coimbatore, he got down from the carriage at the junction where stands the ilupai tree and walked up to the school. In his lecture, he reported that he was impelled to get down from the carriage as he felt he was treading on sanctified soil, and called it prophetically an oasis. This was the ilupai tree under whose shade Swami would later sit in the sun and reign during his sadhana years. Coimbatore was singled out as an attractive oasis when Swami in later years too hallowed this spot as his religious center and ashram. Inthumathi Amma adds to the Chronicle, when Swami was working in Kilnachchi, Swami Vivekananda's visit to Ceylon took place in 1897. Swami participated in the reception that Jaffna accorded to him with great enthusiasm. Swami also took part in the procession from the fort to Hindu College, and later in the public meeting held at the Hindu College premises. The eagerness with which Swami later spoke of the topics discussed by Swami Vivekananda in those early days showed the great latent desire he had for the company of saints. Yoganathan lived like a yogi in Kilnachchi, alone unto himself, immersed in his meditations. He spoke little, for his interests were not those of the people around him. He carefully protected his inner experiences. By his third year in Kilnachchi, he was well settled in his job, executing his duties quietly and well, letting nothing disturb his inner work. He frequently sat up late into the night studying scriptures, singing hymns, or meditating by the light of a single oil lamp. He was in the world, but less and less of it. One thought took early on and eventually quelled all other plans: the desire to renounce the world and seek realization of God, undistracted. It made sense to him. Everything he had ever done, everything he had become, led in that direction. That alone intrigued and inspired him. But he knew he had to find a Satguru, a Jnani, to guide him. The scriptures are adamant. Except through the grace of a living Satguru, a man of realization, the path to the self is not seen in this world. Yoganathan didn't know anyone like that, so he hesitated, watching and waiting. It is traditional knowledge in Shaivism that the Guru cannot fail to appear when the disciple is ready, ripe for grace. Yoganathan knew this to his core. He had learned of the process in the hymns and life of Saint Manikavasagar. At the age of 18, Manikavasagar was the prime minister of the Pandyan Empire, young, brilliant, and wealthy. Though he had everything, he yearned for a guru to lead him from darkness to light. The moment he laid eyes on his teacher, he was powerless but to follow, as he recognized the object of his soul's search. He then abandoned all, family, friends, fortune, and fame. Many such saintly lives Yoganathan had pondered, and he knew that finding a guru was not entirely in his hands. When he was ready, the guru would appear. He went on with his sadhana. He continued to work, and he prayed for a guru, prayed again and again. Chinaya felt it increasingly urgent to broach the subject of marriage. Yoganathan understood the cultural pulls on him and avoided his uncle. He would find something to do elsewhere if he thought Chinaya might visit that day. Though he had long since decided to take sannyasa and thus enter fully the spiritual monastic life he so admired, he hadn't mentioned this to his relatives. He was his usual congenial self around them, though he was doing severe tapas of one kind or another every day. In his private moments, sitting in the shore, he sometimes found himself gazing through the open door, torn between staying or leaving that minute, walking away from the world, from Mr. Brown, from Kilnachchi, from everything he yearned to be on his way. But something held him back, and in his heart he knew it was Shiva's will. He endured by working harder on the inside, and his sadhana seemed to take on a life of its own. Every spare moment found him sitting quietly in the room or in a temple. He felt he had come to the end of everything, as if he had done all he could do. Sometimes he sat through the whole night in meditation, perfectly still, not moving once. On days when he was free, he would pick a far-off temple and walk there all the way from Kilnachchi without stopping. worship and walk back singing hymns along the way. At Nalur Temple in Jaffna he worshipped Lord Murugan, the first renunciate. Meeting the sage of Nalur, one day Vithanayar, his brother Ramalingam, and Thurayapa came to visit Yoganathan, and together they set out walking to Nalur. A man of similar interest, Vithanayar also did sadhana. In fact, being the elder of the two, he felt a certain duty to help Yoganathan forward on the path however and whenever he could. It was the day of the chariot festival in August, an auspicious time to worship Lord Murugan, who would be paraded around the temple in his elaborate chariot. They bathed at the well, put on holy ash, and set out for Nalur. Vithanayar hoped they would see Chelapaswami as well. On their way, Yoganathan told Vithanayar of an encounter he had with Chelapaswami many years earlier. He was about 12 at the time. Suffering from an infected cut on his foot, he was on his way to the doctor's hut in Jaffna town. As he passed by the Tiradi at Nalur Temple, a man shouted, "Come here. What do you want with medicine?" It was Chelapaswami, who beckoned him closer and had him sit down while he examined the wound, nodding his head like a doctor. Chelapaswami told him not to go to the Ayurvedic doctor, but to mash a certain herb and apply it as a poultice to the wound. The foot healed in a few days. That was the only time Yoganathan had been near the sage as a child, though he undoubtedly saw him from time to time around Nalur Temple through the years. It is said that at age 10 or 12, Yoganathan had almost met Kadait Swami in Jaffna town, among the shops. The boy had a high fever, and Kadait Swami just touched him, after which the fever gradually subsided. A little before noon, Yoganathan and his friends reached Nalur and stepped into a huge crowd. 100,000 and more gathered for the festival. Despite the sweltering midday heat, the temple compound was filled. Hundreds were moving about in front of the temple, awaiting a chance to get inside. Bare-chested men and boys rolled in the hot sand around its outer walls as a penance or sadhana, and devotees followed them singing. A mingling aroma of incense and flowers perfumed the air. Like a chorus of voices rose from the sea of umbrellas spanning the dusty square between the Tiradi and temple. In the tropics, umbrellas are not for rain alone, but more often to give protection from the penetrating sun. Out from the open doors of the sanctum came crescendos of shrill woodwinds, kinetic drums, and bells, driven on by the chanting of the Brahmins. Pujas had been going on from daybreak, and the air was intensely charged with Lord Murugan's presence. The mandapam was packed with thousands of devotees jostling and pushing to stand closer to the puja. Yoganathan and his three friends worked their way toward the Tiradi, where they hoped to see Chelapaswami. Before they knew it, the crowd parted, and there was, not 3 meters away, standing among the devotees, challenging and powerful. His gaunt figure stood out sharply against the crowd, seeming somehow taller than his 5 feet 9 inches. Everyone walked around him without coming near, intimidated by his striking appearance. He was barefoot, thin-bearded, and burnt dark by the sun, wearing a single white cloth, wrapped once from the waist down. Surveying the multitudes with transparent glee, he was talking aloud to no one at all, blithely unaware of the looks he drew. He carried himself with a lion's air of dominion and power. A penniless sadhu, he stood like a king, his posture at odds with his conduct and dress. He spotted the 4 visitors just before they saw him, and walked toward the Tiradi. They greeted him humbly. Yoganathan's friends had visited Chelapaswami many times, and Yoganathan could not help but be keenly aware of the majestic being. But now he was standing face to face with the Great One. After a few moments, Chelapaswami dismissed the 3 householders, shouting, "Go and look after your families. You fellows are not fit to become sadhus." Yoganathan, on the other hand, he kindly invited to stay back. "I was awaiting your arrival here. I am going to have a coronation for you soon." Drawing Yoganathan to his side, he gave him instruction in spiritual values, then suddenly slapped him on the head with his right hand, exclaiming, "This is the coronation," and voiced 5 momentous teachings. Summa iru, be still. Ipavo mudintha kariyam, it was all finished long ago. Nam ariyom, we know not. Mulathum unmai, all is truth. Oru pulapumilai, there is not one wrong thing. Yogaswami later wrote, "Then and there I received divine grace. Once these words were imprinted in the heart of the devotee, Chelapa, with his face blossomed with grace, said, 'It is good, dear one, I have been waiting for a person like you.' That evening at sunset, still overwhelmed by the encounter, Yoganathan walked back alone to his aunt's house. Those who recalled those times said that following this experience, the young man met often with Chelapa Swami on weekend trips from Kilnotchchi. Moment of truth. A subsequent meeting, which Yogaswami described years later in his Nachintanai, was equally transformative. Yoganathan was walking along the road outside Nalur temple. Sage Chelapa Swami shook the bars from within the chariot shed where he camped and boldly challenged, "Hey, who are you?" "Yaradani." Yoganathan was transfixed by the simple, piercing inquiry. Their eyes met, and Yoganathan froze. Chelapaswami's glance went right to his soul. The sage's eyes were like diamonds, fiery and sharp, and they held his with such intensity that Yoganathan felt his breathing stop, his stomach in a knot, his heart pounding in his ears. He stared back at Chelapaswami. Once he blinked in the glaring sun, and a brilliant inner light burst behind his eyes. He revealed to me reality without end or beginning, and enclosed me in the subtlety of the state of Suma. All sorrow disappeared, all happiness disappeared. Light, light, light. Waves of bliss swept his limbs from head to toe, riveting his attention within. He had never known such beauty or power. For what seemed ages it thundered and shook him while he stood motionless, lost to the world. He later described it as a trance. To end my endless turning on the wheel of wretched birth, he took me beneath his rule, and I was drowned in bliss. Leaving charity and tapas, charya and kriya, by fourfold means he made me as himself. The roaring of the nada, nada shakti, the mystic, high-pitched inner sound of the eternal, in his head drowned out all else. The temple bells faded in the circling distance, as from every side an ocean of light rushed in, billowing and rolling down upon his head. He couldn't hold on, not for an instant. He let go, and divinity absorbed him. It was him, and he was not. By the Guru's grace I won the bliss in which I knew no other. I attained the silence where illusion is no more. I understood the Lord, who stands devoid of action. From the eightfold yoga I was freed. Yoganathan stood transfixed like a statue for several minutes. As he regained normal consciousness and opened his eyes, Chelapaswami was waiting, glaring at him fiercely. "Give up desire," he shouted. People were passing to and fro, unaware of what was taking place. "Do not even desire to have no desire." Yoganathan felt the grace of the Guru pour over and through him, all from those piercing eyes. Such elation he had never known. Dazed, he saw that the Guru intended to dispel all darkness and delusion with his words, which were beyond comprehension in that moment. "There is no intrinsic evil, there is not one wrong thing." Yogaswami later wrote of this dramatic meeting in a song called "I Saw My Guru at Nalur." "I saw my Guru at Nalur, where the great Tapasvins dwell. Many unutterable words he uttered, but I stood unaffected. 'Hey, who are you?' he challenged me. That very day itself his grace I came to win. I entered within the splendor of his grace. There I saw the darkness all surrounding. I could not comprehend the meaning. 'There is not one wrong thing,' he said. I heard him and stood bewildered, not fathoming the secret. As I stood in the perplexity, he looked at me with kindness, and the Maya that was tormenting me left me and disappeared. He pointed above my head and spoke in Skanda's forecourt. I lost all consciousness of body and stood there in amazement. While I remained in wonderment, he courteously expounded the essence of Vedanta, that my fear might disappear. 'It is as it is, who knows? Grasp well the meaning of these words,' he said, and looked me keenly in the face. 'That peerless one, who such great tapas has achieved. In this world all my relations vanished, my brothers and my parents disappeared, and by the grace of my Guru, who has no one to compare with him, I remained with no one to compare with me.' As Yoganathan tried to comprehend the experience, his Guru had already forgotten him there. Chelapaswami was scanning distant rooftops, mumbling to himself and nodding in accord with all he was saying, then began walking away. Yoganathan started to follow when the sage called back over his shoulder, "Wait here till I return." It was 3 full days before his guru came back, and the determined Yoganathan was still standing right where he had left him. Chalapa Swami didn't speak or even stop. He motioned for Yoganathan to follow, leading him to the open fire pit where the sadhu prepared his own meals. There he served Yoganathan tea and a curried vegetable stew, then sent him away. He didn't welcome or praise his new disciple. He didn't say to come back or not to come back. He didn't have to. Yoganathan knew he had been accepted, and his training began. The first chance he got, he bent to touch Chalapa Swami's feet, and his guru bellowed in dismay. Drawing back, the sage scolded him. "Don't even think of it." Yoganathan was bewildered, but he obeyed, and his guru calmed down. "You and I are one," he said. "If you see me as separate from you, you will get into trouble." Chalapa Swami's insistence on the oneness of guru and disciple, in fact, the oneness of everything, while strange to the average man, was a faithful expression of the ancient Agama texts, which decree, "Shiva is different from me. Actually, I am different from Shiva." The highly refined seeker should avoid such vicious notions of difference. He who is Shiva is indeed myself. Let him always contemplate this non-dual union between Shiva and himself. With one pointed meditation of such non-dual unity, one gets himself established within his own self, always and everywhere. Being established within himself, he directly sees the Lord, who is within every soul and within every object, and who presents himself in all the manifested bodies. There is no doubt about the occurrence of such experience. He who is declared in all the authentic scriptures as unborn, the creator and controller of the universe, the one who is not associated with a body evolved from Maya, the one who is free from the qualities evolved from Maya and who is the self of all, is indeed myself. There is no doubt about this non-dual union. Vajna Notara Agama 2:13-16. Yoganathan was utterly devoted to Chalapa Swami. In later life he expressed his profound reverence in many of his songs and writings called Nachintanai, such as the following: "Come, offer worship, O my mind, to Gurunathan's holy feet, who said, 'There is not one wrong thing,' and comforted my heart. Come swiftly, swiftly, O my mind, that I may adore the Lord, who on me certainly bestowed by saying, 'All is truth.' Let us with confidence, O my mind, hasten to visit him, who at Nalur opened upon that day we do not know declared. Come soon and quickly, O my mind, Chalapan to see, who ever and anon repeats, 'It is as it is.' Come, O my mind, to sing of him who near the chariot proclaimed, 'Who knows?' with glad and joyful heart for all the world to know. Come now to Nalur, O my mind, the Satguru to praise, the king of lions on Tapa's path, whom nobody can gauge. Come with gladness, O my mind, our Father to behold, who of lust and anger is devoid, and in tattered rags is clothed. Please come and follow me, O mind, to see the beauteous one, who mantras and tantras does not know, nor honor or disgrace. Come, O my mind, to give your love to the Guru, free from fear, who like a madman roamed about, desiring only alms. Come, O my mind, to join with him who grants unchanging grace, and as is the Lord who far above the 36 tattvas stands. Spiritual work in Kilinachchi. After the life-altering experience, Yoganathan returned to his work at Kilinachchi, while pilgrimaging the full 65 kilometers to Nalur each weekend to be with his Satguru, and again walking back in time to fulfill his morning duties on Monday. However, his heart ached to leave his job, to let go of the rope, to be with his Guru at Nalur. The strenuous effort he poured into his sadhana was all that allowed him to stick with the routine at Iranamadu. No tapas was too harsh. One day, many years later, a young man came to visit the sage, who had come to be known as Yoga Swami. They talked for a few minutes, and the man mentioned that to purify himself, he had been rubbing chili powder over his body, and then sitting in the hot sun. Yoga Swami's eyes lit up. A fine tapas. I too have done that. Ratnama Navaratnam in Saint Yoga Swami and the Testament of Truth recounts. It is believed that at the beginning of this century, Swami experienced spells of spiritual insights and felt powerfully drawn to his guru. During this time, a select coterie from Kolumbuthuri included the Vidane Thirugnan Sampanthar, Kadirthambi Vitivelu Ponaya Upadiyar, Shiva Gurunathar Thuraipa, and Thayagar Ponya, who visit Chalapar at Nallur quite frequently. Swami would join them whenever he came down from his sphere of work. He would at times recall how vigorously he used to walk all the 45 miles from Kilinochchi to Nallur to meet the Chalapar, for so great was his urge to be in the living presence of his guru. At his workplace, Yoganathan spent his free time during the week deeply immersed in his guru's teachings and in his sadhana. Inthumathi Amma describes those days. The Kilinochchi forest became an apt ashram for Swami to sit peacefully and cogitate and practice all that he had learned from Chelapa Swami. By thinking deeply for long hours, he entered into deep nidai, a state of immersion in the divine. By sitting in meditation and by following the yogic disciplines, he practiced all he had learned from his guru. His chief object was to follow himself. He studied the book that was within him carefully, with great alertness. He would look at his religious books only occasionally, and that too as a means of spending some leisure time. As he became more and more mature in his sadhana, he began to experience the treasure of being seated in yoga and the bliss of meditation. Swami always remembered Kilinochchi as his training grounds to lead a life of happiness mingled with God. In later days, while traveling with his devotees through that area, he would point out the place where he practiced his yoga and say, "This place is extremely suitable for meditation." Near the end of 1897, Yoganathan decided to quit his job to immerse himself completely in his guru's holy presence. As Sampikai Pakan observed, in Swami Kal's life, the year 1897 was very important. It seems Swami Kal quit his job at the end of that year and returned to Jaffna. Swami Kal was about 25 years old. That was the time Swami Kal progressed step by step in the religious life. Inthumathi Amma writes of this transformative time, "The insatiable love for Chelapa Desikar, the benevolent guru full of grace, who was waiting to show him visions that were not visible, began to flourish in Yoga Muni, a name for Yoga Swami meaning silent sage. He became astounded at Chelapa, the guru who taught him the path to knowledge and wisdom, and who was the great knower who knew and realized the Veda without any study. The repetition of his name became sweeter and sweeter. The form of Chelapa became the form he meditated on. His divine feet became the recipients of his worship. His nectaric words were mantric words, just like a compass always pointing north. Whatever work he performed, whatever hardships he endured, his mind was always focused on the chariot house. Yoga Muni realized that it was impossible to have light and darkness at the same time, and decided to renounce his employment and other worldly affairs. He realized that the company of good sages was better than relations, parents, and siblings, and renounced his relatives. Thus he renounced his employment, kith and kin, and went to the chariot house, surrendering himself completely, and remained there at Chelapa's feet, as his good devotee. Yoganathan watched until Mr. Brown was in a good mood, then told him he was leaving. The stern Englishman was naturally unhappy about this and tried to dissuade him, but Yoganathan was firm. Brown then tried to postpone it for a year, and finally relented, saying, "If you desire to resign, at least appoint someone like you to take charge of the work." Yoganathan agreed to that. He wasn't just leaving a job, he was renouncing the world. Brown didn't want that, and wouldn't understand if he were told, because Yoganathan didn't want to leave any upset or imbalance behind. He promised to stay on long enough to train a replacement. He recommended his cousin, Vaithilingam, who was just 19. Ever the administrator, Brown promised to hire the youth only if he could perform as well as Yoganathan. Vathyalingam was happy to be offered the job and arrived a few days later. He shared Yoganathan's simple quarters and imbibed his years of experience during the weeks they were together. Vaithalingam remembered well the time he spent with Yoganathan at the company store, and his recollections became the primary source of knowledge about this period in Swami's life. He was astounded at his cousin's firm habits and austere lifestyle. The whole family knew he was religious, but because he was living in far-off Kilnachchi, none understood the depth of his seeking. Vaithalingam spoke of nights when he woke from a sound sleep to find Yoganathan sitting in yogic pose, pleading aloud for the grace of Shiva. Oblivious to the room around him, he would pray to Shakti, the energy aspect of Shiva, to rise within him and bring realization. Tears wet his face as he begged for a grace. "O my dear mother, O my dear father," as Vaithalingam lay awake, listening for hours, he said he saw there what the rest of the family had not, that Yoganathan could never be satisfied with an ordinary life in the world. He was determined beyond anyone's imagining to accomplish what he later said was the only work to be done on this planet, realization of Parashiva, throwing down the world. The cousins worked together for some time until Brown was fully satisfied with Vaithalingam and told Yoganathan he was free to go. He left Iranamadu to undertake sadhana full-time, renounce the world, and be with his guru. He was ready. Lifetimes of preparation lay behind him. His tapas and meditations had already shorn the bonds of worldly life. Yoganathan returned to Aunt Mithupilai's house and received her permission to live in the hut on her land. She was surprised when he told her he intended to renounce the world, but accepted the idea when she saw how serious he was. M. Arunasalam tells us about this time in his book Shiva Yoga Swamiyar, Varalaram Sathanahalam. From the year 1897 to 1900, Yoganathan's permanent base was the hut at Aunt Muthupilai's place in Kulambathurai area. From her residence, Yoganathan used to visit Nallur on some days and spend all the daylight hours with his guru Chelapar. Sometimes Yoganathan would visit Nallur temple with his friends, Vithanayar, Thurepa, etc. Also during this period, Yoganathan used to walk up Kilnachchi and practice meditation in quiet areas under the trees. Then again he would walk back to Kulambathurai and stay for a few days, visiting his guru at Nallur temple. This routine went on until the end of the year 1900. From 1901 to 1910 he underwent vigorous training and sadhanas given by his guru. Aside from his jaunts to the hills of Kilnachchi, where he sometimes stayed the weekend with his cousin, Yoganathan's life was centered in Jaffna. Early each morning he would walk from his aunt's place to Nallur to spend the day with his guru. Sometimes Chalapa Swami sent him away. Was Yoga Swami permitted to stay at the Tiradi with his guru? He was silent on the matter, but some report that for a time, during the period between 1906 and 1910, he did camp with Chalapa Swami at Murugan's chariot house, so that he could be ready early in the morning to set out walking with his guru. What is known is that they were seen each day traveling about and begging for their food. T. Shiva Yogapathi, son of A. Thilyampalam, narrated that he was told about Yoga Swami's habits during that time. From early morning till late evening, he was always with his guru at the Nallur Tiradi, as well as in surrounding areas of Nallur and at his guru's hut too. Gradually, at the period of the peak of sadhanas, he used to accompany his guru to distant places and return to the Tiradi all by walking. Therefore, Yoga Swami was compelled to be at his guru's feet, since his guru had no fixed schedule and might set out for some distant place quite early in the morning. So mostly Yoga Swami used to spend the night at the Terapi steps. He seldom visited his aunt's place. Yoga Swami stood by, a silent witness, when he was with his guru, though if ever his mind turned to something else, if he thought, well, he surely isn't talking to me, Chalapa Swami would say something something to bring him back with a start and let him know that everything his guru did was worthy of his full attention. He always knew what his disciple was thinking, and no matter the time or place or who was around, if Yoga Swami entertained a thought Chellappa Swami didn't like, or did something that showed he had ceased to see himself and his guru as one, Chellappa Swami would berate him so vehemently it would have destroyed anyone else. Inthumathi Amma describes this difficult sadhana. Chellappa remained the mystery of all mysteries. He would refuse even to look at the devotee who had just worshipped him. He would be angry like death and shout at the devotee who went to revere him with all love. Having been subject to this anger, the devotee would move away and wait with worry while Chellappa ignored him and spoke laughingly with the vagrants who went that way. The minute the devotee thought he is talking in jest, rare mantric sacred words would arise. If the devotee went near him, he would attack without any cause. If the devotee went further away, he would attract him. It became necessary to move with him like those sitting before a fire, not to go too close and not to go too far. The sadhu's life is difficult, unbroken by the solacing. Yoga Swami would say distracting, pleasures ordinary people allow themselves. The sadhu's life is difficult, unbroken by the solacing, Yoga Swami would say distracting, pleasures ordinary people allow themselves. But there was one indulgence Chellappa Swami allowed, their country lane walks. They would amble freely, stride powerfully, exploring their land as though time did not exist, as though they were its kings, roaming wildly, unencumbered by even a destination. It was for them one of life's little celebrations. Almost every day they were together, begging on village streets or meditating at out-of-the-way places only Chellappa Swami knew. They made the rounds of rural shrines and temples in all the outlying villages, sometimes walking for hours to visit a certain one Chellappa Swami had in mind for that day. There they would sit in the shade and meditate together, but if the feeling wasn't right when they arrived, if anything was amiss, Chellappa Swami would keep going to another temple somewhere else. It wasn't unusual for them to trek all day without stopping, sometimes as far as 50 kilometers. When they returned to Nallur, whether early or late, Chellappa Swami would cook a meal for them. Chellappa Swami again made it clear that he would brook no show of reverence or devotion from Yoga Swami. He never once allowed his disciple to serve him, to cook or clean or mend for him. He scolded in a shrill voice if Yoga Swami tried to prostrate or even raised his hands in silent namaskara while Chellappa Swami's back was turned. He would no fiercely chastise and on occasion even kick him if he didn't stop soon enough. Yoga Swami later wrote, "Hail to the feet of the true Guru who took me beneath his rule and gave himself to me, saying, 'Do not suffer by regarding me as separate from you.'" Hindu tradition urges the Shishya to serve his guru night and day by every means, to wash his clothes, bring meals, run errands, anything to serve him as Shiva in human form. Yoga Swami knew this and longed to express the grateful love that filled his heart, but Chellappa Swami was ruthless in denying him any expression of devotional dualism between guru and disciple. Yoga Swami's training demanded much of him. He loved his guru dearly, but Chellappa Swami was hard on the youthful Shishya, bringing him slowly to patience, peace, service, and spiritual maturity. No matter where he was, Chellappa Swami talked to himself constantly, as if he were the only person in the world. He rarely said he, she, or it, never admitting a second, and he repeated the same obscure phrases over and over again for months on end. While Yoga Swami was with him, Chellappa Swami once repeated for a whole year, "There is nothing evil in the world, no evil in the world." Not all that the Guru muttered was so exalted. Yoga Swami later wrote that Chellappa Swami's soliloquy was a stream of thought that transcended understanding, and one had to listen carefully in order to catch the gems that fell from those lips. People who watched the two together wondered how the disciple understood anything at all from the Guru. They observed no open exchange between the two. But Yoga Swami saw through Chellappa Swami's guise of madness and used every gesture, every word, every look from his Guru to refine his own nature, to perfect his sadhana. All his life, Yogaswami marveled at Chilapaswami's absolute purity. He was so pure, Yogaswami said, that nothing impure could stand in his presence. In the following Nachintanai, the master of Nalur, Yogaswami gives a lucid description. He who both like and dislike has exterminated the noble one who never forgets the holy feet of God, who that there is not one wrong thing has openly declared. 'Tis he indeed who has assumed the Guru's splendid form, he who unceasingly proclaims that all that is truth, the master who has passed beyond ideas of good and bad, he who sees and looks upon himself and me as one, out of love upon my head has placed his beauteous feet. The exalted seer who by the name of Chalapan is called, who ever and anon, who knows, repeats the madman, who will never by the world be known. He will be seated every day upon the chariot house steps, dark as the clouds in color. He ever had the habit to sleep upon the earth. His pillow was his hand. In the form of the Guru, he lived with grace and honor at Nalur, where fresh water and fertile lands abound. The mighty one, who is declared for the benefit of all the great and blessed mantra, nothing do we know, who delusion, lust, and anger has banished from his heart. He bears the name Chelapan, and at Nalur he dwells. The crowning jewel beyond compare, who always will repeat that it was all perfected ages long ago, that madman whom nobody is able to describe, in the presence of Lord Murugan he forever lives. At Nalur, where orators and poets bow and worship, my guardian, who made me his, and ended birth and death, wears the divine and sacred form of holy Chelapan, who accomplishes his service at Kandite Swami's shrine. Inthumati Amma gives form to Chilapaswami's formless teaching style in the following summary. The sweet drops of honey gleaned from the sweet-scented flower Chelapar by Yoga Swami, flitting around, can be stated as follows. First, Chelapar taught the path of knowledge by the rare mantric words, "Who are you?" Yarada Ni. Then he taught the path to understanding this by delving deep within oneself with the words, "Search within." Thedada Ul, and thus guided him. The hindrance to search within was the attachment to the world, hence he said, abandon desire. Therada Patrai, he calmed the devotee who, while searching within, found everything enveloped in darkness and was shattered with the words, "There is nothing wrong." Orupalapum Ilai. When Yogaswami stood bewildered, not understanding the connotation of the words, "There is no wrong," the Guru took him to the front of the temple of Kandan and, when the curtain was drawn, pointed to the spear Vel of knowledge and explained the Vedantic truth that once the curtain of illusion is drawn, only Brahman remains.